What's up, everybody? We are live with the Awesemo Fanduel DFS Week 5 show. I am Matt Gajewski, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Kyle Dvorchak. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. You can follow him at Kyle Tweets here. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. That way you know when this video and all other content goes live. It is the best way to support Kyle, myself, and the entire Awesemo crew. And of course, hit that thumbs up button. Let's see how many we can get today. We are talking FanDuel specific DFS show. Of course, the big news with the week is what are we going to get with the Tennessee Titans and the Buffalo Bills situation? And Kyle, it is not looking good. It was a game I was actually really interested to stack as a contrarian approach to the slate. And rumors right now, looks like this game could be moved to Monday or Tuesday. Any idea what is going on here?
Yeah, it would be, frankly, at the rate we've seen consistently. There was a 2-day stretch. I wrote about this game, like multiple sites. I was like, guys, it's Bills season. And unsurprisingly, Titans go and do Titan things. They had 2 days, I think it was probably Monday, Tuesday, where they had no players return positive tests. I was like, oh, well, that's it. We've seen the end of the stream of positives flowing in. God, that has not been the case. I would bet anything we don't see this on the main slate. You know, in your season-long leagues, I've set up all of my leagues where you get to name an alternate. Don't play these guys in DFS. I don't know why. There's no reason to bet on this game happening. It simply doesn't look like it's going to happen, at least on the main slate. It'll be a fun showdown slate if we get it, but there also won't be great prize pools. So not happy with these GD Titans. I miss my Bills.
I hear you, man. And we're talking about this game because we like to start off the FanDuel stream, of course, talking about news throughout the week. And honestly, there's not a ton of really impactful news right now. Just a few of our marquee players that are injured, maybe coming in as game time decisions. So the real news coming to this point was what was going on with the Titans Bills. Keep your eye on that. Right now, it doesn't look great. As far as some of those stars that we might not see this week and we're at least waiting for game time to see what happens, Julio Jones is one. He actually got in some individual work today, which was a surprise to me. He aggravated his hamstring injury on Monday night. So I was anticipating Julio missing a week and us getting Olamide Zaccheaus. He's not as cheap on FanDuel specifically, but it looks like Julio actually has a chance to play. Outside of him, I'm not noticing a ton of injuries. What do you make of Julio and then anyone else we should keep our eye on?
Yeah, Julio was definitely one to keep an eye on. At the beginning of the week, I didn't actually think he had a good chance at all at playing. Now at this point, it seems like he probably will play, or at least has a good chance of playing compared to the beginning of the week where I thought there was no way. Let's look. So this is one that is disappointing because another player I've really got excited to talk about and have talked about, written about a lot. Raheem Mostert got in a limited practice on Wednesday. Earlier in the week, Kyle Shanahan said that it didn't look great for his chances of playing, but a limited practice on Wednesday is typically a pretty good sign. Jerick McKinnon Smash Week was going to be fun. I'm not sure you really want to get any interest in him until we at least see 1 week of McKinnon plus Mostert as their starting tandem, or the duo of backs that they run. Lamar Jackson hasn't practiced yet this week. I think it is just, you don't really need Lamar Jackson to practice every single week. He's great regardless, but 2 missed practices, I believe it's a knee injury, or that's what they're calling it at least, is concerning. It's definitely worth monitoring. I would still bet heavily that he plays, but you have to consider if they are really blowing out Cincinnati, which is the expectation, does he get pulled for the entirety of the fourth quarter? Maybe that's something you factor in, maybe not, but it would be in the range of outcomes that we do see Lamar Jackson play 3 smashing quarters and just not get there because he doesn't play an entire quarter of football. We saw that come close to happening. This could be I think we saw probably maybe 3 or 4 games of RG3 last year, at least where he gets a snap or 2. This maybe is the most run from RG3 possible, which is a little concerning.
Yeah, we definitely need to monitor Lamar throughout the week. It was interesting. The Ravens beat was pretty confident that Lamar was just missing practice for maintenance reasons, but obviously the 2 DMPs in a row, big red flag. We'll certainly need to watch him. I dug into some quotes on the Raheem Mostert, Jerick McKinnon situation. It seems like Raheem Mostert could be on a pitch count, even if active. I think that gives some outside consideration to Jerick McKinnon in GPPs. He's cheap across all sites right now. On FanDuel specifically, you can get him at 6,400, and he's been a monster through the 2 games Raheem Mostert has missed. So I don't know, maybe an outside consideration in GPPs, even if we get Raheem Mostert back. Couple other injuries of note. We might see Henry Ruggs take the field, and that's an interesting matchup with a really high total. Las Vegas should certainly be throwing against the Chiefs. We have Kareem Hunt. He's logging limited sessions. We don't expect Kareem Hunt to miss this game for any reason, but similar to last week, I think Cleveland might limit him a little bit in game, potentially leading to, 8 to 10 touches for Dearness Johnson. They're already a team running a ton of just running back plays overall, just carries on the ground, which might lead to some extra Dearness Johnson time. Outside of that, Drew Lock might return to this game. It looks like he's returned to practice in a limited fashion. Not huge news there. Juju Smith-Schuster and Diante Johnson miss Wednesday. Could be a maintenance day, but just something to keep your eye on. Anything else catch your eye?
Yeah, do you find it weird at all that Juju and Deontay missed despite getting an extra week off? Any concern for you on those guys? I find that to be a little strange.
Yeah, that's why I threw it on there. I believe Deontay Johnson was dealing with, I think it was a toe injury. He didn't just have the concussion. I know the concussion's what ruled him out of their week 3 game, but Deontay Johnson was banged up before that as well.
Yeah, I just think that's interesting. I still expect when you unless you're like full not practice through Friday, you're probably going to play. Like all of these players are, veterans to some extent of the NFL. They get some rest. You want, 1 week or one, day or 2 days of practice is probably worth less than the actual physical recovery that not practicing nets them. But, interesting to note, certainly worth considering in some of these situations more than others. Like Kareem Hunt, we saw last week, I believe it was 13 carries for Dearness Johnson, former AAF stud. It is interesting to note that Kareem Hunt came into that game with a groin injury. They lost Nick Chubb, and they immediately thought, let's give Dearness Johnson some run. It wasn't like he was, I think he did lead the team in carries, but he didn't lead the team in running back scoring, for instance. So maybe Kareem Hunt gets some work siphoned off. I still think he's probably a good play this week, but it's worth considering.
Yeah, I like Kareem Hunt too. Even if he's a little bit limited, he should still see a large amount of carries there. Well, that is most of the injury news and, of course, the Titans-Bills situation. We will keep our eye on this. Of course, check back throughout the week for more shows. You'll get all your updated information. But let's move over to the quarterback position. The game plan today is to move through the Fanduel slate position by position, talk some ownership, start with chalky plays, and then move through some low-owned leverage plays. At quarterback, we're seeing similar ownership to DraftKings. It is Dak Prescott. It is Patrick Mahomes. It is Deshaun Watson. Big difference between the Fanduel slate and the DraftKings slate. Fanduel's pricing is a little bit flatter. On DraftKings, you see a couple quarterbacks priced way up near the 8K range, guys like Lamar Jackson, guys like Dak. And then the minimum price, we have Kyle Allen, and he's 4,100. On FanDuel, Kyle Allen is 6K flat, and we get Patrick Mahomes and Dak at 8,700 and 9K respectively. So we're not seeing that huge price difference. Are you more likely to eat chalk in the context of the FanDuel slate here with Prescott and Mahomes coming in around 17 to 18% ownership?
Yeah, for me, I'm not incredibly interested in Patrick Mahomes this week, but I am quite fine eating chalk with Dak Prescott. I don't love doing it. I think Zeke is also a great play, but I think a lot of my lineups are either going to be built based on, using Zeke as a pivot off of some of the chalky Cowboys or just eating that Cowboys chalk and trying to get different. And it does largely funnel down to what you said about the pricing structure. My opportunity cost isn't nearly as great. Even, I guess I'm probably not playing Kyle Allen in tournaments, but in cash, you actually do have to at least throw the name out there and consider what does a roster build look like when I can pay nearly half the price for Kyle Allen compared to a Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes. It's like just over half the price, essentially. That conversation just doesn't even come close to happening on FanDuel. So I'm much more inclined to pay up to that mid to high price range. And it makes it easier too, because across, all scoring formats, whether it's the 3-point bonuses for 100 or 300 yards, half PPR or not, you've really needed to get a Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Josh Allen in your lineups. I think Matt Ryan was probably pretty good 1 week as well, but you've needed to get one of the predictably high scoring quarterbacks, and FanDuel's pricing much more pushes you in that direction. I'm not going to swim against that trend. I'm probably going with a lot of someone like Dak.
Yeah, I love Dak. I mean, the matchup against New York, and it's not even so much who they're facing. It's Dallas's defense themselves just being so banged up. They can't stop anyone. Right now, just looking at their defense, they have Leighton Vander Esch, Sean Lee, Anthony Brown, Chidobe Awuzie, all on injured reserve. Those are two of their top corners. It makes a lot of sense why teams have been able to rack up so many points on Dallas. And they just have to play from behind, try to catch up. Dak, combined with Ezekiel Elliott, Mari Cooper, Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, That is exactly the stable of weapons I would want to do so. So Dak makes a lot of sense, even as the highest owned quarterback. Someone else coming in with some pretty decent ownership, despite some poor play to start the year, is Deshaun Watson. And it's not so much Deshaun Watson, but the Texans have disappointed themselves. We know they let go of their head coach. Deshaun Watson is a little bit cheaper than Dak and Mahomes, about 1K price gap here on FanDuel. And he's coming in with a fraction of the ownership to right around 12%. Are you interested in Deshaun Watson at all with the new coaching staff? I'm not sure what to make of this.
Yeah, I've heard rumors that potentially Romeo Crennel, being a defensive guy, could lean on the run a bit more. They've already, they haven't really unleashed Deshaun Watson, and maybe it's because he isn't playing quite as well as he did last year, but frankly, there's no reason you should be giving as many carries as they do to David Johnson when you're 0-4. You should be trying to run the air raid offense if you have Deshaun Watson and you're 0-4. I don't think the coaching change makes a huge difference. They were coached suboptimally before, and I think they're probably coached suboptimally as well this time. But I don't think that's, that means there's essentially no difference. And maybe it just means that, the ceiling or the floor, I guess, is the expectation. But there's a chance that coaching change could mean something better for this team because it's hard to see it being worse, So I don't love Deshaun Watson this week. I actually think in the same game, I'd be much more interested in, or at least relative to the ownership, more interested in a guy like Gardner Minshew. Like both sides of the matchup are great. And I think I would just attack a guy who's going to be lower owned, but in a similar spot. And it does sort of tap into that Deshaun Watson upside because Gardner Minshew to go off likely needs Deshaun Watson to have a good enough game. I think the target concentration on specifically Will Fuller and the air yards concentration on Will Fuller makes me interested in mixing and matching Minshew stacks and just always running that back with Will Fuller. I don't think Watson is a bad play. I just think a pivot in the same game makes a lot of sense for my builds.
There's a lot to like about Houston. They're 7th in seconds per play, but they've only been able to get off the 31st most plays in the NFL. So it speaks to how quickly they're running, but their lack of efficiency. I'm not sure if getting Bill O'Brien out of the picture is going to change that. One thing I think that could help is just the matchup against Jacksonville. They're allowing 8.3 yards per pass attempt. That's the third most in the NFL. So it is certainly one of the better matchups Deshaun Watson has faced. And he has certainly not had the easiest schedule to start the year. But as we move down the price tier, we are seeing a lot of the expensive quarterbacks come in with the higher ownership on FanDuel. It leads to some interesting leverage spots. We have a favorite of mine in particular, Joe Burrow, coming in less than 1% owned. Now, it's not exactly Joe Burrow's easiest matchup of the year. We just saw them take on the Jaguars last week. And now this week we get Cincinnati taking on Baltimore. However, this Baltimore team just allowed 2 consecutive 300-yard passing games, one of which came to Dwayne Haskins, who now is apparently the third quarterback in Washington. Any interest in Burrow and the Cincinnati team for leverage?
Yeah, my only problem with Burrow would be I'm not sure he has the same touchdown upside necessarily as a Gardner Minshew or Daniel Jones we have on our list as some leverage plays, because although I agree the Baltimore defense is definitely not what they were last year. Basically, anytime you name a really good defense from last year, you can almost blanket statement say that they're not as good as they were because defensive production is so hard to maintain year over year. It's quite unsticky relative to offensive production, for instance. So the Baltimore Ravens defense, I don't think as much of world beaters as they were last year, but they're still quite good. And Joe Burrow hasn't been awfully efficient this year. He's thrown the ball a ton. That's helped him get there in spots, and he has some rushing equity. I'm not sure if that gives him a multi-touchdown game, and especially on FanDuel where I'm stacking and I need my guys to score as many touchdowns as possible. They can't quite get there with, the 300, or the receivers can't get there with the 100-yard bonus. I'm more trying to seek out good touchdown spots. I think I would probably rather eat, the $600 more in the significant ownership bump with Deshaun Watson, or go for a smaller ownership bump, but a slight price decrease in a guy like Gardner Minshew. Even Daniel Jones kind of falls in that range, but Daniel Jones is probably actually bad, but I do think Joe Burrow is good. He hasn't been awfully efficient this year, but I think his upside is being a good NFL quarterback. Honestly, I don't know if Daniel Jones has that in him at this point.
That's a really interesting point. You bring up Daniel Jones, and if we look to ownership across DraftKings and FanDuel, this is one of the largest discrepancies between the two platforms. Daniel Jones is a top 5 owned quarterback on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I'm guessing this is mainly because of a looser pricing structure. Daniel Jones doesn't appear in the top 5 most owned quarterbacks. He's sitting sub 5% ownership on FanDuel, and it makes me at least interested. We talked about Dallas being really bad on defense. The Giants have faced one of the toughest schedules in all of football to start the year. They faced the Steelers, the Bears, the 49ers, and the Rams. Now they get a Dallas team, which is a complete sieve on defense. The game is totaled for 54 points. And if you're trying to stack Daniel Jones, who's just 7K flat himself, you can find Darius Slayton at 5,800. You can find Evan Ingram, Golden Tate, 5,500 for each of them. Am I crazy, or should we be fading Daniel Jones?
I would not blame anyone for fading a quarterback who has been undoubtedly bad through 4 weeks. And there's really not, I guess you could point to the defensive matchup, but we've seen time and time again that the defensive matchup isn't the only thing a mediocre quarterback needs to be good. Like, everything has to fall in place. So I would not blame you at all for moving that. I was looking through our ownership. You can see sub 5% Josh Allen. One thing I will note, I saw some rumors that Cam Newton could return. He essentially needs, I think, back-to-back days of negative test results is the thing. Would be interesting because I would imagine his ownership would get so low because you're not going to be, if you're making a lineup today, you're not playing Cam Newton. Would be interesting to see.
I actually didn't see that. That's a really interesting note. I would be interested in Cam Newton in that spot as well against Denver. They should handle the Broncos pretty well there. Let's talk fades then before we head out of the quarterback position. It sounds like you are not too fond of Daniel Jones, someone that I'm actually a little bit interested in targeting in this spot. If I'm looking to fade someone, one player in particular that kind of caught my eye in sort of a no man's land in pricing and ownership is Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray was a really interesting play when the season opened up and he was priced as, on Fanduel specifically, in the mid 7Ks. We could get his rushing upside at a cheap price there. But Kyler Murray's really struggled as a passer. He's averaging just 6.4 yards per attempt. That's 26th in the NFL. And it's really limited some of his options in the receiving game. For example, DeAndre Hopkins had 9 targets last week, and he only caught 7 balls for 41 yards. They're playing the Jets. There's always going to be upside against the Jets, but we've really seen teams just handle the Jets, take their starters out, and it's kind of tap the upside of these signal callers. Where are you at with a guy like Murray who is in this middle range kind of in pricing, in ownership, and is there anyone else you'd like to fade?
Yeah, so Murray, I really like Kyler Murray, but his style of play, or the style of play that his offense has run him into, I'm not sure exactly, chicken or the egg situation. One of the lowest ADOTs in the league, one of the lowest, I believe maybe the lowest yards per completion in the league, because they just run the horizontal air raid. So you do get a good rushing floor from Kyler Murray, but the ceiling game as a passer, I'm just not sure if it's in him. And of course, playing the Jets this week, you're not getting imagine Joe Flacco coming out and actually being able to put up enough points to make this game a shootout. I can't envision it happening. So for me, Kyler Murray, probably an easy fade because there are options. I know they're going to be chalkier, but Kyler Murray, an easy fade when I can get, a Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson in a game where Deshaun Watson's game looks like it should be somewhat competitive in terms of both offenses being able to score. We know the Ravens can score. If I'm rostering Joe Burrow, that, plays on the assumption that he can score. I don't see it happening with the Jets facing off against Kyler Murray. And for a similar reason, Patrick Mahomes is a guy who at high ownership, high price, I'm probably just not going to be as much on because I don't think, you really do need the Raiders to come out and keep contending with them. And you need Clyde or Hilaire not to vulture the first few touchdowns, because if they get to an early lead, you could very much see a scenario where Clyde Hilaire just runs out the second half and Patrick Mahomes doesn't have to drop back a ton. In tournaments, I'm just looking for games that teams are going back and forth, scoring at will. Not sure we see that with Vegas. I am sure we don't see that with the Jets.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like we're in lockstep with that game. Before we move on to the running back position, guys, we have showdown tonight. Tampa Bay's taking on the Chicago Bears. We've added some great new tools to our NFL Express Pass. For only $3.95, you can purchase an NFL Weekly Express Pass, which now includes everything you need for NFL Showdown and single game contest formats. You now get access to Awesemo Showdown single game player projections, ownership projections, and top plays tool when you purchase this pass, in addition to player rankings, lineup builder light, ownership rankings, and the Top Stacks Express tool. It's our best offering ever for an Express Pass, so head over to awesemo.com/join today to purchase your $3.95 NFL Express Pass. We have a ton of stuff going on at Awesemo, including Showdown today. We have free rankings. So if you're checking out this Tampa Bay team who's dealing with a ton of injuries, you're not sure who's going to step up and play, you can head over to awesemo.com, check out the free NFL Showdown rankings, a great resource for tonight specifically. We also have MLB player projections, PGA Top Golfers tool. That is all free today. I think it's going to be a fantastic game between the Buccaneers and the Bears, and the injuries only make it a little more interesting, so check it out. As we move on to the running back position, Kyle, we have a one and only Mike Davis essentially playing the Christian McCaffrey role in Carolina, coming in with the most ownership basically across platforms this week. Is Mike Davis a trap?
I don't think Mike Davis is a trap. I mean, if he was up at, 7.5K, if he was up at 8K, sure, you could say, in any scenario, what is he, like a career backup running back who, was almost certainly not going to have a single touch in any game that Christian McCaffrey is healthy. You could say a player of that ilk would be a trap at, 8K. He's only 6.8. The ownership is going to be high, and maybe that's why you get off him, because if he doesn't find the end zone, he probably doesn't end up making the optimal lineup. Are his odds of finding the end zone quite good, given his massive receiving role and very solid rushing role, plus no Reggie Bonifant, who had 10 carries, I believe, and 2 catches last week? They do look good. It does look like he will probably find the end zone. But because we are so heavily tilting ourselves towards touchdowns, especially on FanDuel, I don't think you have to play chalk Mike Davis. I think there are other spots, still some chalky and some not, that you can pivot off of the highest owned running back of the slate.
Yeah, this is a really interesting dichotomy between DraftKings. On DraftKings, we have Mike Davis, who's slightly cheaper than a James Robinson. On FanDuel, we actually get James Robinson slightly cheaper than Mike Davis. And I actually think the style of FanDuel's platform, which really rewards touchdown scoring over, it's a half-point PPR league, but it's really rewarding those running backs that score not quite as much, the running backs that have the role in the receiving game. Are you interested in taking about a 10% ownership break for a guy like James Robinson over Mike Davis? Or maybe are these two guys you're looking to play in the same lineup?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's quite shocking to play those two guys in the same lineup. I think just on FanDuel, which will be a different approach as I have on DraftKings, I'm actually probably just going to be not full fading Mike Davis. I'm going to be below the field on him because that is such an immense ownership when there are good pivots. You talk about James Robinson being 400 cheaper. I get that they're underdogs this week, and the line has actually moved slightly in their favor. They're still pretty big underdogs. But James Robinson is a guy who I would have thought is a good player on a team that is favored, so probably not very often. That simply hasn't been the case. His past 3 weeks, 4 targets, 6 targets, 4 targets, and he's caught all but one of those. He's being used as a receiver. He's obviously being used as a rusher. He has like 364 carries, almost 2,000 yards in his final college season. I don't want to say James Robinson is game script proof, but he might be game script proof. His game has a very good total. I think James Robinson is absolutely, for both cheaper in terms of ownership and cheaper in terms of actual salary cost, a great pivot off of Mike Davis.
I think so too. And as we keep looking through the higher owned running backs on FanDuel, again, we're seeing a lot of the expensive plays. We just don't have as many salary restrictions on a platform like FanDuel. So we get players like Ezekiel Elliott, who's one of the most expensive players on the entire slate. He's north of 30% ownership right now. You mentioned potentially liking Ezekiel Elliott as a pivot off some of the other high-owned Dallas plays. So I'll give you the floor on this one.
Yeah, it's simply this, that it seems like no matter what happens in a Cowboys game, there is going to be a massive amount of points, whether it means that they get down early and have to come back, whether it means they play in a competitive game. Dallas games are going to feature points, and that's going to lead to a lot of ownership across the board. But anytime Ezekiel Elliott scores, assuming it isn't a receiving score, which for him is possible, but much less likely than a rushing score, that is touchdowns he takes directly away from chalk plays like Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, and so forth. So I like that way of approaching essentially any high total game that I'm not as excited about. I don't know if Daniel Jones can quite turn this into a game where you want to double stack Dak and run it back on the other side. Do I think the Dallas defense is bad enough that Daniel Jones can keep a close enough game that it's good for a fantasy environment? Yeah, probably. But that doesn't make me want to double or triple stack this game. It just makes me want to get one-offs. I think one of the ways you can gain leverage with your one-offs is find players who can go off without the entire game going off. Any running back who's going to carry, 20 plus times a game has that potential. So both Ezekiel Elliott and Clyde Edwards-Hilaire are chalky spots I would rather get in on than Mike Davis, who's going to be more popular. He's cheaper and has probably a better points per dollar projection. But that ownership is really difficult to get on. I like Zeke and Edwards-Hilaire in their spots in their respective games, and they're both touchdown regression candidates. PFF has them as the 2 lowest touchdown over expectation or touchdown versus expectation players based on their usage. And even Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's usage as a receiver has been good, but hasn't come up in the touchdown department. So these are guys, if they score 2-3 at times, they really bury the Patrick Mahomes and the Dak stacks. That gives you great leverage. And obviously, not only does it give you leverage, it gives you a ton of fantasy points.
For sure. Clyde Edwards-Hilaire is a name you brought up as a regression candidate. Usually this is a spot where I'm trying to target players that are going to bounce back at low ownership. We are not getting that with Clyde Edwards-Hilaire, even at an elevated price tag of $7,900 on FanDuel. And it does make sense when you take a bird's eye view of Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's stats. He's averaging 21.25 opportunities per game. That's carries plus targets. And the receiving role for him has been quietly one of the better ones in the league for running backs. Target counts of 2, 8, 6, and 3 in his 4 games, running around on 59% of Patrick Mahomes dropbacks. Then you factor in the potential game script in a game versus Las Vegas, where they are nearly 2 touchdown favorites. A lot sets up for Clyde Edwards-Hilaire here. And it sounds like Kyle and I are making the argument to eat some chalk at running back this week on Fanduel specifically. And that's certainly an approach I'm going to be looking to take. As we start getting into some leverage plays on Fanduel, some of the bell cow backs are in tough spots. Joe Mixon, who we just saw an amazing game from last week, he's going to Baltimore. We have Jonathan Taylor going up against an impressive Cleveland Browns defense. We have Miles Sanders taking on Pittsburgh in a low total game, who also has a really strong defense. So leverage is kind of hard and it's going to be tricky. Is there anyone you're looking to specifically as a low-owned play at the running back position?
Yeah, I think Miles Sanders is probably the one I am most interested in. We have just seen week in and week out, they continue to target him as a receiver. And although Fanduel obviously doesn't give you the full point per PPR, that does also increase your touchdown and yardage totals. It's not a bad thing to be a receiver, even though it's not quite as beneficial on Fanduel. Miles Sanders, I know he's expensive at $7,500, but that is probably a massive contributor to why he's being so low owned. He basically has like the exact same role as Mike Davis. It's very similar. Their projections should be spot on. You pay a few $100s more, but you get a 30% ownership discount for a similar player. The game environment isn't quite as good, but I also think Pittsburgh, at least, maybe the Eagles, but definitely Pittsburgh is capable of putting up points on offense. So that's one of the key factors in stacking a game or just playing players in a game. Like, I don't want to play any players that play in a Jets game. I can see Philadelphia putting up some points, even though it's a difficult defense. They put up points, some points against a difficult defense in San Francisco. It was a scrappy game, but they got there. I think people are just underestimating how much Miles Sanders' workload really does give him both a great floor and a great ceiling. It's an ugly spot, but at the ownership, I think it's worth going to as a contrarian pivot.
I don't hate the spot, actually. You and I have talked privately a little bit about this game. There are 2 teams that like to try to run a lot of plays here. Pittsburgh's 8th in plays per game. In Philadelphia, they're not the most efficient team, but they're 11th in seconds per play. If these teams can get over some of the better defenses here, I think we could see this game go over the total. I don't know if it has the same ceiling as maybe a Dallas-New York Giants game, but there's at least the ancillary stats to indicate this game could go over the total. Makes me somewhat interested in Miles Sanders too. I am still interested in Jonathan Taylor here, as the Colts are slight favorites over the Cleveland Browns. Jonathan Taylor's a little more owned than a guy like Sanders, but he's a little less expensive. I think whoever is leading in that game is going to try to pound the run. It's a 1.5 point spread in favor of Indianapolis right now, so this game really could go either way, which brings me to Kareem Hunt. We talked about him at the beginning of the show, potentially dealing with an injury. Are you worried about that at all, or are we good to target Kareem Hunt at the running back position?
Yeah, it's a slight concern. Like, I won't say that I don't every once in a while when I wake up in the mornings think like, I wonder what Deontay Johnson is up to. But they gave Kareem Hunt the extension in the offseason, and despite having what film grinders will say is probably one of, if not the 2, probably him and Derrick Henry were cited as the 2 most just effective, efficient, and talented runners between the tackles, they still split Nick Chubb's work with Kareem Hunt. That tells me their actions tell me a lot about how they think about Kareem Hunt. The only concern really is that groin injury. Like, I don't think if we have 100% healthy Kareem Hunt, there's any chance he seeds more than like a handful of carries, 2 or 3, your typical backup carries, to a guy like Deontay Johnson. The groin injury has me a bit concerned, but also they weren't playing in an awfully competitive game. I know the box score, Dallas brought it close last week, but for a large portion of the middle of the game, they were pretty much having their way with the Dallas Cowboys. So it would make sense that you would want to get Kareem Hunt off the field, especially once you find out that at least Nick Chubb probably didn't look like he was going to return that game or anytime soon. Obviously, they found out afterwards that he'd be put on IR for a few weeks. But I think for that reason, Kareem Hunt, even though maybe some Dearness Johnson concerns, still should project to see a vast, vast majority of the carries out of the backfield. And all the targets, frankly. I'd say all the targets, maybe Dontrell Hilliard picks up 1, 2, I'm not sure. But Kareem Hunt, I have projected as one of the premier bell cow backs this week.
I like that. I like that a lot. And it projects to be a little bit sneaky in this spot too. So answer me this. We have a lot of running backs we're interested in targeting, a lot that are coming with decent ownership. Is there a running back that's maybe carrying some ownership that you think is a particularly good fade this week?
Yeah, we talked about Mike Davis. Another one I have, David Johnson. We saw Duke Johnson come back and take somewhat of a role, and David Johnson has just been wholly inefficient. Maybe that's a product of his offense. So I guess you could say that as his offense performs better against Jacksonville, maybe that's a scenario where David Johnson gets involved. I'm comfortable making that fade because I think at 6,400, the exact same price, James Robinson is just a better player. He's got a better receiving role. I would much rather take we have them at the exact same ownership. I would confidently say at the same ownership and the same price, I'm taking James Robinson all day. Josh Jacobs, I know he's kind of James Robinson that way where he's mostly known as an effective between the tackles player, has some receiving upside. I just don't love the game environment of his team projected to trail by 2 touchdowns. I'd much rather go to the other side and play some Clyde or Hilaire, despite the fact that Jacobs, higher price, I believe, relative to the field, higher priced on FanDuel, still garnering a decent amount of ownership. I'm fine just leaving that ownership on the table.
Yeah, I think Jacobs is a tough sell. He is averaging a ton of work, but he's only running a route on 42% of Derek Carr dropbacks. If Kansas City gets up big in this game and early, it could be a real problem for Jacobs. One other name I have on here, he's not really a traditional fade like the guys you named because he's very cheap, is Damien Harris for New England, 4,500. You're going to see a couple people go to him. With Damien Harris, it's not so much that I don't think he's a fine play. He's basically playing the Sony Michel role in a game where New England is favored by almost 2 scores. However, he's in a 3-man rotation, and with Damien Harris, it's more about the opportunity cost. When you play Damien Harris, that takes away another roster spot on your team that can't be Mike Davis. It can't be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It can't be a back that you're just more confident in. Any qualms with that idea? Or are you comfortable getting to a guy like Harris?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with Harris, but I don't mind the fate of him either. And like you said, he saw 17 carries last week, but Rex Burkhead saw 11 as well. He's not just going to run roughshod over his entire backfield. We're still going to see some Rex Burkhead. And if those end up coming at the goal line, a Harris 17 for 100 game where he doesn't catch a pass is utterly useless for you. So you do need a certain amount of touchdown projection, and Rex Burkhead takes away from that. So I don't mind the Harris fade, and it's not like you're fading a 1% play. Some people are going to be on him, and his cheapness probably does lead you to a specific high-priced quarterback build. So potentially if you want to pay down a little bit at quarterback, it gives you more freedom to move up from Harris to guys that are more expensive. I have no problem fading Harris at his, good price tag, but he's not a lock or anything. He's not the free square by any means.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I'm glad we're in agreement there. Let's talk wide receivers. On FanDuel specifically, we're getting a ton of ownership in just a couple games. So in our top 6 owned players on FanDuel, we have 3 Cowboys and 2 Panthers at the wide receiver position. The top 6 owned wide receivers include Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, DJ Moore, and Robbie Anderson. What do we make of this, Kyle? This is something we've seen the last 2 weeks now. I was more inclined to fade the Dallas side when we had the 3 wide receivers in the top ownership, and it really burnt me. So what do we make of this situation?
Yeah, I still think it's okay to play some of these chalky receivers, although at that point, I probably am looking to make multiple pivots off of our chalky running backs to get both, Jonathan Taylor, Miles Sanders, or, Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, mixing up these bell cow backs that aren't going to have high ownership because their spots aren't perfect. No doubt, you don't love facing Pittsburgh's defense. But if I am playing, an Amari, CeeDee Lamb, Dak stack, I can't be eating that chalk at running back. I am just giving myself 0 leverage. I don't mind playing them. I would say my only caveat is for any of Amari Cooper, DJ Moore. I think you should probably even make this argument with Will Fuller. If you're playing them, you kind of have to either double stack or find a really weird bring back because everybody, my mother has never seen football in her life and she would love to stack Amari Cooper and Dak Prescott. It's just going to be so chalky that I don't know you gain any leverage by running a single stack of any of DJ Moore, Teddy Bridgewater, Will Fuller, Deshaun Watson, or Amari Cooper and Dak Prescott. So how do you feel about trying to get off of that, not by fading Amari Cooper, but by going, Amari Cooper, Dalton Schultz, and Golden Tate or something like that in your Dak Prescott stacks?
I think that is a good way to differentiate yourself. And we talked about this a lot, but it's not necessarily the individual ownership of every single player in your lineup, but thinking about your lineup as a whole. How are you making that lineup unique? It is okay to eat chalk at some spots, and we don't want to play 1% plays just for the sake of playing 1% plays. We want to field a competitive lineup overall. So you make really good points of thinking about how to navigate this chalk and maybe getting different in another way. And I like that call a lot. And for the record, I'm not trying to throw shade on any of these Dallas or Carolina wide receivers. If we look to a guy, let's use CeeDee Lamb, for example. CeeDee Lamb has a 14.7% target share. That is over 10% less than Marquis Brown. But CeeDee Lamb has more targets. How absurd is that CeeDee Lamb has a 14.7% target share? Marquis Brown is at 26.5, but CeeDee Lamb has more targets. There's just so much for these Dallas receivers. It is hard to fade them. So I don't mind picking and choosing a spot there. Anything else to add on these guys? Maybe we should touch on the Carolina receivers too, because they're kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, it's the same way. And even though you're not paying as much for Teddy Bridgewater, I'm not as concerned with how, playing Amari, Dak needs to throw. Let's say Dak needs to throw probably 3 to 4 touchdowns to make the GPP winning line. That basically guarantees that Amari Cooper and one of Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, or Dalton Schultz, could even be Zeke. One of those guys plus Amari Cooper would be my guess, but I guess it could be other guys. Amari Cooper being the leading receiver is who I start my stacks with. It guarantees that 2 guys get in the optimal lineup. Teddy Bridgewater isn't as expensive, so you could argue that Teddy Bridgewater only needs 2 to 3 scores. If you get a double score from DJ Moore, it's not guaranteed that a guy like Robbie Anderson catches that other score. But it still leaves me at the problem where I am going so vanilla with my stack that everyone is going to have that you could look at it and say 10% of the field potentially could have that stack. I still need to get more different, despite the fact that I think the correlation tapers off, or the necessity of the correlation tapers off as you go with a cheaper quarterback. It doesn't change the fact that DJ Moore to Teddy Bridgewater is going to be so common. So I think, interestingly, you could do DJ Moore to Mike Davis to Teddy Bridgewater. You could go with DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, or you could leave DJ Moore off the table. I'm just looking at him and using him as an example. I think both in this scenario and the Dallas scenario, the tight ends are interesting. I think Ian Thomas is an interesting pivot for your Teddy Bridgewater stacks.
Oh man, Ian Thomas has been a guy I've been on for a while, but let's save that for the tight end talk. As we talk about this wide receiver position and we talk about navigating chalk, it seems that you and I are in agreement that it's okay to eat some of these Dallas guys. And in fact, you probably want to, just given what's happened in the first couple weeks, but you need to be unique around them in some fashion or another, which brings me to our leverage plays at wide receiver. One guy I do like in particular is Marquis Brown, and I'm really interested to hear what you think on Marquis. He has great market share numbers. Now, the Ravens have been in a lot of blowouts. They've been on the winning end of 3 of these, and they've been on the receiving end of that blowout against the Chiefs. Marquis Brown, with his 26.5% target share, has accounted for 6, 6, 6, and 8 targets. Again, a CeeDee Lamb who has a 14.5% target share has more targets than that. Can you look to Marquis Brown here and hope that the Ravens maybe pass more, maybe they're in a competitive game against Cincinnati and use him for leverage?
Yeah, I think as we were talking about it, I was scrolling down our ownership, and I scroll, and eventually I get to Marquis Brown at, right around 5%. I know, so I see this on Twitter a lot. People say, it was a few weeks ago when Aaron Jones had a blow up spot. If you're a GPP player and you didn't think Aaron Jones was a good play, maybe you should just quit playing GPPs. And I understand the process that he was, even in factoring in hindsight, he was a good play that week. And that has happened multiple times where, looking back, you can say it's pretty obvious that a guy like Joe Mixon, getting the volume he gets, was going to blow up at some point, and you should just be on him until he blows up and capitalize heavily. It does, I think, overstate. It's a little braggadocious, overstates the confidence you can have in any play, but I get the sentiments, and I'm going to make that statement this week. You should be, if you're a GPP player, you should be getting Marquis Brown into your lineups. Like you said, the air yard share is incredible. It's a top 5 air yard share, I believe a top 10 or 20 target share. They're coming from Lamar Jackson, who hasn't looked as good as he hasn't looked last year, but he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the league and has one of the better deep balls in the league. And they're facing a team that should just should give Marquis Brown very little resistance going deep. So I think Marquis Brown is one of the best pivots. One other one I want to bring up, you have Deontay Johnson here, Juju Smith-Schuster as well. Like guys coming in at less than 5%. Juju is less than 1%. Man, I have not really made it a staple of my game to play these middling quarterbacks because you've needed Dak, Russell, Josh Allen to win essentially. But I am not, I see the ownership and I am not afraid to get a little bit of exposure to a Juju, Deontay, and Ben Roethlisberger stack. You can run it back with Miles Sanders. All of these things sound quite appealing in theory until that game is 17-14.
Dude, I'm telling you, the plays per game looks good as long as
I'm thinking about it.
A little bit of regression in defensive efficiency. We could see a shootout here. This is not a high likelihood scenario, so take this for what it's worth. What I will say is if you do run 150 or whatever your preferred lineup builds are, say it's even a 20 max, and you throw in one Ben Roethlisberger stack, you're going to be over the field on this stack. None of these guys are coming in with any sort of ownership. Deontay Johnson in particular is sub 5%, and he's a guy that has a 23% target share, and that includes a game where he only had 2 targets because he suffered a concussion and had to leave the game. So Deontay Johnson, who is significantly cheaper than Juju, and he's not exactly, I don't know how to put this. I wouldn't say Juju's the bona fide wide receiver one there. I think there's a case to be made that Diante could be overtaking him. We don't know this for sure, small sample size. It seems like you disagree with that, but it's at least worth talking about, I think.
No. I was saying, no, we're definitely not sure Juju is the number one there. And it's sad because I love Juju. No, yeah, it's sad because I love Juju, but like I can't, look in the face of, especially we saw Deontay Johnson, like you said, it was a concussion, but also the toe injury that pulled him out of the last game they played. Going into that, like he was smashing Juju in terms of targets and air yards because Deontay wasn't running super deep. Juju had like a 6 ADOT or 5 ADOT. So I love Juju, but no, we cannot say with any certainty that Juju is the number one receiver. If anything, the data this year would tell you it's a small sample. Obviously, it's a sample of like 2 games and then half a game, then Deontay Johnson doesn't play. But in a small sample, Deontay Johnson looks like this team's number one receiver. And my best ball shares are hurt by that, but I can pivot those with my DFS shares. So,
oh man, yeah, it's the same with me too. But that's okay. We're going to take this on a week by week approach with DFS and everything's gonna be fine. This week I like Diante Johnson. As far as fades at the wide receiver position, I think there's a case to be made for a lot of players kind of in this middle tier, not only middle tier price, but middle tier in ownership. We're seeing players like Cooper Kupp, who are arguably the number one on their team. I think there's a case to be made for Woods there still. Cooper Kupp is 7,200 on Fanduel. He has a nice 24% target share. But again, he's in a situation similar to Marquis Brown where this team is so run heavy that we're just not seeing the huge target volume for Cooper Kupp on a week-to-week basis. This particular game against Washington, the Rams are favored by 8.5 points, which lends itself to the run game. And the total's low at 45.5 points. So I really question the ceiling on a player like Cooper Kupp, which makes him a strong fade for me in particular. Is there anyone else you're looking to in a fade spot this week?
Yeah, I think that is probably one of the absolute best fades. And on the other side of the ball, Terry McLaurin, he's cheap, but like Kyle Allen, come on, man. I get Dwayne Haskins was bad, but Kyle Allen, I don't have any confidence in saying he's any better. This is a low total spot, both in terms of the game and the implied team total for Washington. This Rams defense has played, fairly well through a few weeks. They have Jalen Ramsey. I just can't find myself going to Terry McLaurin when I can get Marquise Brown for lower ownership and lower price. Like that to me is a pivot you should make every single time. I don't even mind. Like I would rather play Joe Burrow as my quarterback running into an even more stout defense, because at the end of the day, I'm much more confident in the quarterback controlling the outcome of a game than a defense. I have confidence that Kyle Allen won't be able to control the outcome of the game except if he turns the ball over and he controls it the wrong direction. So for me, I think even if they're just mediocre quarterbacks, even if you don't love Joe Burrow, I would rather tether my receivers to Joe Burrow in a bit of a more difficult matchup than ever rely on Kyle Allen helping me out in fantasy.
You know what? I do agree with that. And I don't know, man. I'm a little higher on Joe Burrow than I think you are. We like Joe Burrow because he throws the ball about 50 times a game. It's a lot of opportunities for guys like Tyler Boyd, guys like T. Higgins. I think it's a little bit sneaky there, Kyle. As we move over to the tight end position, one last note on tonight's showdown contest. Guys, we have a giveaway at Awesemo.com. If you head over to the pinned tweet on Twitter, the Twitter account is at Awesemo_com. You can enter a really nice giveaway here. You can win an NFL Plus yearly pass. It's a $250 value. And it's simple. All you have to do to get a part of this is pick the winner between Nick Foles and Tom Brady. Who will have more passing yards tonight? You leave your answer in a reply. You must follow the account. One random winner will be selected among the correct guesses, and you're going to win a free year of Awesemo Plus NFL. You're going to get all of the tools that Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, builds. All you have to do is follow the Twitter account, pick the winner, and follow the instructions on the pinned tweet. So make sure to check that out. A really nice giveaway. We're doing a ton of fun stuff for these FanDuel and DraftKings single game contests. Make sure you check out the free content as well. Looking at the tight end position, Kyle, there's a big difference again here between DraftKings and FanDuel. DraftKings, we're seeing most of the ownership concentrated between 2 players in Darren Waller and Travis Kelce. On FanDuel, we have George Kittle in the mix here too. Tight end is a lot flatter on FanDuel specifically. Instead of it all being focused on those 2 tight ends, we have, George Kittle, Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, even an Evan Ingram in a relatively flat ownership group there. What do we make of the tight end position overall in the context of the FanDuel slate?
Yeah, assumingly it's because of the George Kittle price tag. 7,100 relative to Travis Kelce is actually a discount worth considering. And it seems like versus the DraftKings ownership projections, we essentially chopped off 6% from Travis Kelce, chopped off 6% from Darren Waller, pulled something from somewhere else and gave it all to George Kittle because he's coming in quite popular. For me, I'm not awfully considering going up to George Kittle and Darren Waller because I don't love their game environments as much. With Travis Kelce, I actually think, at least in terms of like his team's total, they have a massive, massive team total. I think it's north of 34 points for their Chiefs implied team total. He needs, if he scores 2 of those touchdowns, it doesn't guarantee that Patrick Mahomes is in the optimal lineup, but it does guarantee that Travis Kelce is there. I'm not sure I see the multi-touchdown upside with either of Darren Waller or George Kittle. I actually see that with Travis Kelce, and you don't have to eat the highest owned player at the position on the slate. It is still quite expensive, and it does limit what you can do elsewhere. But if the top 3, if we're going to refer to them as that, I think I have to be considering Travis Kelce as one of my favorites, although Mark Andrews up in that price range as well is an interesting run back in those Joe Burrow stacks. And I know I rag on Burrow, but he's a guy I will definitely have exposure to because although he hasn't been efficient to this point for the most part, efficiency is fluky, but those passing numbers are probably not going to be fluky. There's almost no scenario in which they don't just throw the ball a ton. So frankly, I'd probably rather look to guys like Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce, where I think their teams are more capable of putting up touchdowns than I think, George Kittle and either a hobbled Jimmy Garoppolo or CJ Beathard or Darren Waller and Derek Carr are able to. I just don't see the touchdowns coming from them. And on FanDuel, whereas like George Kittle's 15 catches are awesome, I'm really looking for a touchdown or 2 from my tight ends, and I think you could just as easily get that from Evan Ingram or Travis Kelce.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't think I'm as down on Kittle as you are. I do like the little gap you have in pricing here, but again, FanDuel is a little bit softer in price generally, so it's not like that $700 that's going to take you to get up to Kelce is going to get you a ton elsewhere, depending on your roster construction, of course. I am interested in Kelce for sure for all the reasons you mentioned. You just do not see 35-point implied team totals in NFL games. Someone is going to absolutely blow up for this Kansas City Chiefs team, and now they're all garnering high ownership here. I'm more willing to eat the chalk at the tight end position than some others just because we know Travis Kelce is going to get some volume that will actually set him apart from most of the tight ends. And our leverage plays, we have guys like Eric Ebron, Hayden Hurst, Ian Thomas. None of them are seeing the volume that Travis Kelce is. So I think it is warranted to eat a little bit of ownership at this position, given the overall construction in your rosters. As we look at some low-owned plays and some leverage spots, is there anyone that sticks out to you at the tight end position that maybe could see volume that could rival Kelce or an Ingram or a Waller or Kittle?
Yeah, so I'm looking at our ownership now, and once you get off of the top 4 owned guys, it goes Evan Ingram at 14%, and there's a pretty significant drop-off to just under 7% for Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz getting more targets and running a ton of routes than Michael Gallup, getting more targets at least. I believe his route numbers are better as well. So I actually think that Dalton Schultz, despite being technically in the top 5, there's a pretty significant tier break between Evan Ingram at 4 and then Dalton Schultz at 5. And it allows you to, again, tap into an awesome game that, any game that features Dallas is going to be awesome. So I don't think that's a terrible play. I think Dalton Schultz, despite being, technically top 5 in ownership, is really not top 5 in the way we talk about it at other positions. His ownership is going to be very relatively tampered compared to a Darren Waller, but you still get access to an awesome game, and it makes your DAC stacks, especially if that's your route you're going, it really does help your DAC stacks get different. So I think if you're playing DAC or not, you have to have some consideration on Dalton Schultz.
Yeah, I still think punting at tight end a little bit is viable. There's, on FanDuel specifically, again, we're not seeing the wide range in prices that we see on DraftKings. So, going from a Kittle down to even someone near the min price like Ian Thomas isn't as wide of a gap as it is on DraftKings, which lends me more to paying up on this specific platform. As far as some of the players that we could potentially get leverage on, I think there's some sneaky plays in a guy like Eric Ebron. He's 5,100. So again, he's just a little bit cheaper than Evan Ingram. What we really like about a player like Eric Ebron is he's not even 1% owned in our projections. So you're getting immense leverage here. He's a large field tournament play, in my opinion. Ran a route on 79% of Ben Roethlisberger's dropbacks in week 3. He now has 2 straight weeks over 73% of the routes run. I think he could be an option here as a leverage play. You mentioned Dalton Schultz, who I do like as well. Anyone else you'd take a look at?
Yeah, so I'll let you talk about why you like him just as a philosophy play. The same reason, Ian Thomas. I think Ian Thomas is a very solid play for the same reason as Dalton Schultz. It is very viable, but it gets you off of the chalky Teddy Bridgewater stack. And Ian Thomas, you talked about it. How often can you find guys who are like starting tight ends in games with, at least for Ian Thomas, an incredible environment that are going to be owned by like, a handful of people in a tournament with 100,000 people? His ownership is well under 1%. He's cheap. He's in a great game environment. And it seems like his success has come not at the expense of the other receivers, but it's probably just Curtis Samuel that gets taken off the field. Or maybe in this case, Curtis Samuel shifts a few plays to running back. But it seems like he can outproduce a guy like Curtis Samuel and be that second stacking option with your Teddy Bridgewater stacks. It does seem to be quite popular. I think if you're playing Teddy, you really have to consider going with Ian Thomas.
I like Ian Thomas. He's cheap. He's someone that was hurt at the beginning of the year, which really hurt his role in the offense. We've slowly seen him kind of regain his footing as the starting tight end. He had 5 targets in their previous game, and now he's running around in 69% of Teddy Bridgewater dropbacks. Just for your reference, that's more routes than a guy like Tyler Higbee. That's more routes than Chris Herndon. That's more routes than Jonnu Smith, who are all more expensive and all project for more ownership. And they're all in questionable roles. So yeah, I'm okay with getting Ian Thomas in some stacks. Again, he's so low owned that you don't have to really go way over the field to get a nice share of Ian Thomas. But as we talk about some of these guys that Ian Thomas is running more routes, then it brings me to fades. And I think there's a couple of pretty clear fades. Tyler Higbee at his price, he's not going to be owned. And people are starting to figure out Tyler Higbee's not actually running a ton of routes. He's being used a lot as a blocker. And the production he's had to this point in the year is mainly fueled by touchdown production. Jonnu Smith was another guy I was really excited to talk about in this range because he's actually carrying some ownership, but it doesn't appear that we're going to get this Titans game. Yeah. So I'll give you the floor. Any tight ends you're looking at fading?
Yeah, we talked about it. You can only eat so much chalk. I'm probably specifically off of Darren Waller chalk, less so off of the George Kittle chalk. I actually get George Kittle's actually, incredible, probably the best tight end in the NFL. Probably going to see as many or more targets than Darren Waller in a better spot. His team probably has a better chance at putting up points than I would say Derek Carr does against a Kansas City defense that's played quite well. So I'll be off Darren Waller. I'll be under the field, but probably not, completely zero on George Kittle. I think those high price guys, if I'm playing high price, I'm probably pivoting a lot to Kelsey.
I think that's a great move. For what it's worth, I'm okay with a lot of tight ends in that price range. Before we get to some bold calls, guys, there's over 100 of you in the chat. Thank you for watching our FanDuel specific show. If you could hit that thumbs up button, that is the best way to support Kyle and myself and the entire Awesemo team. It helps us out a ton. Thank you if you've done that. As we get to some bold calls, Kyle. So one of my bold calls right off the top here, I am going to say that this Dak Prescott stack, I'm going to say it quietly because I don't want everyone to hear me if this comes true again. It's not going to win the Millie Maker this week. We're going to have someone other than Dak in the Cowboys. And I think a sneaky spot could be Pittsburgh and Philly. I think we're going to go with one of these low-owned players, whether it's a Diante Johnson, a Juju Smith-Schuster, or Eric Ibron. Not sure the whole stack gets in there, but I do think a couple of these guys are in really nice spots. And I think it's a low-owned stack that does take down the Millie this week. What are you looking at for some bold calls, some players in some sneaky spots this week?
Yeah, I've got a similar one, another game that maybe not as appealing as your, Cowboys games or any of if the Bills would have played the Bills game. But I'm going to say Joe Burrow goes in, takes down Baltimore, pulls off the upset win, and he, with a double stack and run it back with Marquis Brown, is the Millie Maker winning lineup.
My man, I absolutely love that call. And the best part about it is it's not expensive. We missed Tyler Boyd earlier. He was someone I wanted to talk about. He's not very expensive. He's $6K. And then we have the likes of AJ Green and T. Higgins. If you decide to go back to AJ Green, I won't fault you. But T. Higgins at the same price range. Both of these guys, all three of them really are seeing immense target volume. Tyler Boyd in particular, after his dud in week 1 where he just had 5 targets, he's seen 8, 13, and 8 targets. Again, this Baltimore defense has given up 2 300-yard passing games consecutively, one of which was to Patrick Mahomes, one of which was to Dwayne Haskins. So I think there is a lot of viability in the Cincinnati stack, particularly with Joe Burrow throwing the ball a ton. Before we get out of here, with this stack, I'm curious, what do you think about Drew Sample?
Yeah, so he's a guy actually I wish we would have talked about, but now we get a chance to, is that he's still he's sort of Dalton Schultz without the production. He's playing on a team that generally you would want to target, all things held equal, because they run a ton of passing plays. He's been on the field for a majority of the receiving down snaps. He just hasn't, he's running routes, He just hasn't gotten a look since that one first blow-up spot, which he wasn't even the starter that week. I don't think he's a terrible play. And much like we talk about with, Ian Thomas or Dalton Schultz, these are spots you want to target. If you can get a starting guy who's going to be on the field, his touchdown equity seems pretty solid. And he could have not a multi-catch game, 5, 6, 7 catch game if things break right for him. I think he's probably a low, median projection play, but his ceiling is quite good for being a low, low ownership, low price type of play.
Yeah, man. I mean, he's 4,600 on Fanduel. He is not expensive whatsoever. And he kind of fits that mold. The trend we've been seeing a lot on the DFS platforms to start the year is that you don't necessarily need the highest priced tight end to win these tournaments. Now, that could be a function of not having Travis Kelce on the main slate, missing guys like George Kittle due to injury. But at the same time, if you can jam in some other studs into your lineup and then play a guy like Drew Sample, and if he gets in the end zone, it just helps the overall construction of your roster a little bit there. Could be something to consider. But that will do it for Kyle and myself today. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. He is at Kyle Tweets here. Of course, we have an awesome podcast network at Awesemo. Anywhere you can find podcasts, we are live there. If you can ever catch the shows live, feel free to check those out. Otherwise, we'll be back again next week with more FanDuel content. Kyle, I believe you're live tonight with the Showdown pregame show.
Yes, I will be on Live Before Lock with the man himself, Baker, Alex Awesemo Baker. So check that out. Get all the good stuff before we go live for another fun Showdown content. I think it's a great spot too. So check that out. 7 o'clock probably.
All right, guys. We'll catch you again next week. Have a good one, everyone.